Let's see if that's working. No warming exercises going off. That would be more lifting the crate of Iron Brew, yes. Definitely more lifting the crate of Iron Brew. Hello everyone, how are we all doing? Right then, Streamlabs is being a little bit interesting because it's managing to produce 4 of every quote, every comment. And I have my little buzzy thing, which is now no more. Nicest way, I don't want a little buzzy thing going around me. So, hello to Stephanie. Apparently, you got here first according to the comments. Hello Richardson, Jay Richardson. Hello Richard Hughes. Hello Martin Doherty. Hello Daniel Freeman. Hello Paul. Hello King George V. Hi Ian Carr. Hi Paul Johnson. Hello everyone. Hello Albert Zalpsy. Hello Stephen. Hi Jay. Hi RAF4. Hi Angus O'Sonnell. Hi Felix. Frankly, I'm not going to bother with the things scrapping in front of me. Right then. Jay Richardson, that sounds terrible. Jay Illingworth, hello everyone. Right then. So, hi Blue Shirt Butter. Hello Left and Doing a Bit. Right. So, first things first. I have been a little bit distracted while setting up because my mum got called by the doctor. So instead of printing this stuff out, I was downstairs helping with making sure that the lovely the camera phone being used was positioned in the right place to get the correct picture of the feet. The things you do as a son on lockdown. But no, thank God, Iron Brew now and you lot. That's my happy space for this lockdown period. So, I'm glad you enjoyed today's films. Hi Potter. Hi Sean Mac. Oh. Yeah, also, my mom's got arthritis and asthma and a bad hip where she was bashed into by a trolley in Sainsbury's, and when I say trolley in Sainsbury's, I mean one of those big store trolleys, the ones they carry stuff around, and she was completely sideswiped by one of those which got out of control a few years back. And so, you know, arthritis, bad hips, bad ankle, occasionally it's not that good. Luckily, hopefully the doctor's going to help her out. She's going to get some stuff sorted out. Jeff Beeler, afternoon. Can you plug the book Michael Clapp is doing a chapter for on Buccaneers? I will do when I get the copy sent to me. And I am hoping to be more involved in it than I currently am in that project, because that's a very, very cool project. Basically, there is a very, very good book being produced on Buccaneers in service and their experience. Shomak, just watch Mysteries of Deep. I forgot how many ads TV has. It was the first time that I had seriously watched the show since Military History went on air. I don't know. It is good. Right. Let's see. I have my copy of RN Ferguson 1939 open to an appropriate page. Now that is good, Jay. These are actually some very cool books. I have to say, they get into... I have been in past told off a little bit for using some of the books I use because they're not always considered the most academical sources. Saying that, I can't find my current copy. I have managed to put it down somewhere, or it's fallen on the floor. Where has my book gone? Ah, there it is. It's hiding next to the projector. Yep, Ian Carr, Blackburn Buccaneers, yes. These are very cool books. I have not just this one. I have also got which HMS King George V will like. RN battleships and battle cruisers in focus. And RN aircraft carriers in focus for anyone interested in this. Compiled by Commander David Hobbs, this one. And David is a lovely guy. And this book is an absolute beauty. Some of the pictures in here. They're all black and white. But there is, you know, HMS Indomitable in here is lovely. And there are some really cool pictures. If you want to see this one. No, we will get started properly on the D-Class cruise in a second, but I just, you know, introducing these books is always fun. Ooh. Yes, you have, yeah. These are just good books. Jeff Beal, I have Douglas Morris's Cruises on Cruise of the Royal Navy and Commonwealth Navies. Yeah, I have that book as well. That's an excellent book. That's the thing. You do have to back them up when you're academic with academic sources, but you can use them properly if you do that. And you can do some excellent picture analysis. Because sometimes the archive records don't exist anymore, but you have the picture of the ship and you can go in front of you. Well, it obviously has that and that and that because I can see it. But that does cause you trouble because then you have to back up that your assessment is correct. Which is why you then turn to the big books like I have behind me. You two lot, though, not mind joining me over here. As you, Mozilla. Currently double stacking books because more books have arrived and I need to buy more bookshelves, basically. Again, I'm double stacked all the way across there for starters. Right, but the reason you have books like this is because if you get a book like this or you find pictures of ships and you need to identify things, you start going through books like this and you go, well, that picture looks like close enough to that. So, you know, it's a good one. Right then. Not now. And I keep trying to make it turn off the chat going up on there because on Streamlabs one it keeps repeating everything about a dozen times, whereas in a normal one it's fine. Ah well, we'll just ignore it. Or we can always do the other option. So I don't have to be bothered with it. And distracted by it. Right then, let's see. Is that working? I'll quickly flick to the camera as the picture and see. Yep, that's working. Right then, so if that's going to work like that, then I can run this. I have to admit, there's currently a series of books I'm tracking down, which is the Brassy series, which is basically the American version of Jane's. And, well, let's put it this way. I'm really, really hoping that Patreon continues to fund as well as it is doing, because basically that's there's a large order of Brassies I've tracked down, which will be next month's Patreon spending. Because they are very, very expensive, and I can't really justify it based on my current bank balance and projected university paid income. Universities are being tight at the moment. Anyway, all good, and you can see me. That's good, because now I don't have that going past and annoying me like anything. And I can have this like this. So I can see whether things are working. Right then. So, D-class cruisers. They're pretty ships, and they are really, really good at what they do. But the big debate was about their origins. And the first point someone did make to me in the question was that SMS Karlsruhe, I'd spelt, no, Karlsruhe, I'd pronounced wrong, and B, I'd spelt slightly wrong, so I do apologise for that. But hopefully, you can see this picture if I zoom in enough. And basically, this is the basis of the idea, apparently, for the Royal Navy ships. Because if we take this picture, if you imagine, instead of having the guns along the center line, you have these two guns, instead of this like this, they are one here and one here. And then guns here, and guns here, and then these two. That is what the Germans are producing. And the Royal Navy here is they're producing one with an extra pair of guns. Now, as Kaz has quite correctly pointed out, it is partially because the German ones are being built to be coal and oil fired, and therefore they don't have a lot of centerline space. But in the nicest way, they could have designed around that by making their ships slightly bigger, and they could have worked with that one. But what the Royal Navy does is goes, right then, so you're producing 10-gun ship, which will actually have a broadside of 6 guns. Okay, so that's going to be expensive, and that's going to be things you can't use. What we'll do is we'll produce a 6-gun ship. But then there's the other origins, which is they're just a long-term improvement of the C-class. Which is pretty much, if anyone looks at them in Freeman's book here, is what they would be definitely thinking. Now, the interesting thing I point out is their stats. Definitely is their stats. And while I remember, hi Mum, hi Louise, hi Anne, hi Karen, and hi Eric. So that's hi to my mum and sister, and my girlfriend and her mum and dad. So as you're all watching, hello. If I forgot that, you know, one of them would take me out. It should be pronounced Karlsruhe. Okay, thank you, Albert. Thank you for the German lesson. I need that. Karlsruhe. Karlsruhe. Thank you. The D-class were oil-fired, as the C-class had been before them. which enabled some things. For starters, it meant that the Royal Navy's cruisers were a lot more ship horsepower than their German equivalents, although coal was actually quite a good armour. The biggest difference, and the biggest thing you have, though, when you start looking at them, is you start seeing there's a difference coming on in the hulls than what you'd expect if it's being built to fight either as a progression of the C-class or to fight the Germans. Okay? This is where I start to grow iffy with both those origin stories. I start looking at them and go, well, I can certainly see that as a good justification from the Royal Navy's perspective. The Germans are building new supercruisers. We therefore need to build our own new supercruisers. Fund this, Treasury. I can understand that assessment, and that would certainly work. And it's something the Royal Navy uses on quite a few occasions. As a tactic, it does work quite well. But, and this is the point which you have to also consider, if this was built just to fight the Germans, and you were building it, you would build it with a North Sea hull, because that's where the Germans are fighting at the moment, and you'd possibly, considering it was not within the Royal Navy's purview to not do it, they could have got a better way with just putting on 4 double gun mounts instead of going for 6, and then they could have had it far easier. Why do you go for 6 mounts instead of 4 doubles, which they have available at the time? In fact, one of the ships actually gets fitted with a double mount. Well, there's only one reason you pick singles over doubles at this time, and that is if you want to spread out your fire. And if you want to spread out your fire positions, that means you're worried about longer term survivability, and therefore you're thinking about operating further range. Because if you're operating in the North Sea or Europe, there are British yards not far away. Okay. Then we talk about them and we go, so they the Cairo class, the C class, to place 4,200 tons, yet are actually longer. They are 148.12 meters to the D classes 143.5 meters. And the displacement in this is the standard figures I'm talking, not the ones which out having fuel and water added, is 4,850 tons. So, well, the D class are 650 tons heavier. These are some dense little ships, and I mean that in the terms of the structural construction way. They are very dense ships, and they are very good ships because of that. It makes them very survivable, not just least because you've got an inch of armour built around the magazines. So this is my point. The Royal Navy in 1916 is just fought the Battle of Jutland. Sort of. And it's now looking ahead, and it's looking at the potential end of the war. It's got a rising Japanese Navy and a rising US Navy, which were already rising prior to World War I, but have used the advantage of World War I to really step up. It's looking forward to an interwar period, well, it doesn't know it's an interwar period, but definitely a post-war period where the world is going to be very complicated. So here's my thing. This is, let's call, well, actually his name is Nuts technically, but we're going to call him Admiral Jellicoe. And he's having a chat with the Third Sea Lord at the time, and goes, Third Sea Lord. Yes, First Sea Lord. What we really need is a ship which can do the Imperial policing and survive and do all the stuff while we're transitioning to the new fleet built with wartime experience. We do, First Sea Lord. What should we build? A light cruiser class, First Sea Lord. It works. That's what they're building them for. The D-class cruisers, in many ways, even more than the C-class, are being built for a post-war world. Right then, let's make sure I'm not missing any questions. Carl Harmon, Dr. Clark, should all RN ships mount twin turrets, and maybe ships such as the 31 have two twins for naval gunfire support? I would love them to all have twin turrets. In fact, actually, that's the big problem I have with the D-class. But it was planned to be solved. It's kind of interesting. If you look at what Henderson was talking about in the 1930s, the revision to them and the revision to the C-class were all twin turrets. And the reason you have a twin turret is A, it doubles up your firepower, but B, it provides you with that much more capability. That much more boom boom in the same moment. And it doesn't make your targeting actually any more difficult. That's the thing. It gives you, you can be running everything through the same targeting solution for that turret. You just are producing double the amount of firepower on it. Braden Atkinson, why was coal good armor? Wouldn't it burn? It might burn, but it wouldn't explode. And the thing was, if it's densely packed enough coal, it would absorb a lot of energy from the impact. Remember, a lot of the damage done by weapons when they hit ships is by the kinetic energy and by them going through different things. So if they set off an explosion, but they had one side of the bulkhead from the coal store, then that might stop the whole of your ship flooding. Yes, you lose coal. Yes, you've got a hole in your side, but it's a bit safer. Right. Sean Mack, is this one of those things where they say one thing and then buy a different thing? I think this is one of those things where saying one thing, saying another thing, and what they're buying can all neatly be combined together depending on how you present it. Because the thing is, how you present it, and there are legitimate cases. So these historians I'm talking about, they're not wrong. And that was the interesting thing. I was looking at this debate and going, both sides are right. The D-class are a progression of the C-class. And yes, they are also built to counter the Germans. But that doesn't mean that's their summation. In fact, what's tying them together is building them for another role. And you can see what they're being built for by their design. And HMS Delhi will be the perfect example of this, and a permanent flagship role. Basically, Delhi is just the queen of the light cruisers for about a good 20 years. Furry kitten. It is a particularly amorphous mass, but yeah, talking about coal. Tony Bevel, was the hull changed hydrodynamics for oceans? Well, that's the other thing. The D-class hull is slightly shorter and slightly fatter. Now, as I've been over before, if you are building a ship's hull for maneuverability and long-range cruising, you tend to build it slightly shorter, slightly fatter, i.e. with a slightly higher ratio of length to beam. If you want to build it for a high-speed operation, it's got to be long and thin, i.e. like you're building, I don't know, one of those T-clippers. Very long, very thin in relation to the length. Whereas when you're building, if you're building a ship for anti-submarine warfare, you want it maneuverable, so it tends to be shorter, fatter. These D-class are slightly shorter, slightly fatter. They are built for long-range operations, and you can see that in their ranges and capabilities. Knowing my family and my girlfriend and her family, they are probably watching the chat as well. In fact, I sometimes do watch some of the questions which come up because I know my girlfriend. Seriously, I'm always surprised whenever we discuss the Falklands War, I don't get questions chucked in there. Furry Kitten, never ever have a squirrel in charge of naval building strategy. Nuts was standing in and acting in the role of First Sea Lord Admiral Jellicoe. It's his first acting role. Well, usually when he comes up in lecturing classes on MS Teams, he's Professor Nuts, and he does do these things quite well. It's useful. It sticks in people's heads. Jailing with a Bruce. Coal dust is very explosive, especially when shaken up in an empty bunker. In solid form, it is safer than most fuel sources. That's the point. If it is an empty bunker and it gets hit, that can be more problematic. Dunedin is pronounced Dunedin. Yeah, I know. Yeah. My Gaelic isn't what it used to be. Sean back, not too complicated with lots of room for upgrades. That is basically the C class, the D class. They are lots and lots of space. And the upgrade plans that the Royal Navy was looking at in the 1930s were really cool. And I have a strong suspicion, A, they'd have had more ship horsepower at the end of it. B, they'd have probably end up gaining speed and range. C, they would probably have kept their torpedoes, well, and to put it this way, I have a feeling they would have lost 2 of the treble launchers and had the other 2 treble launchers replaced with quadruple launchers, and they would have had 4 twin 4.5-inch turrets put in, and they'd have probably they were supposed to gain at least 2, possibly 4 pom-poms, quadruple pom-poms, so they'd have been pretty heavily armed. Lots of 40mm guns, lots of 4.5-inch general purpose. They would have been basically massive battle class destroyers. Furry Kitten has just reminded us all of the response sent from General, I forgot his name, during the Battle of Bastogne, the commander of 101st Airborne Division. Right, so, Steph Thompson, would a couple of D class have helped save Prince of Wales and Repulse if they had been sent up with them? Okay, D class as they were existing in 1941. If they'd had ones built along lines of HMS Danny post refit, yes, they could well have provided a significant, whether they'd saved them or not is a different matter, but, you know, they could have certainly provided a significant boost of firepower in terms of air defence if they could have had, if the Royal Navy had managed to upgrade their D class when they'd wanted to, i.e. in the early 1930s, 1934, 1935, and had 4 upgraded D class, and maybe if the aircraft carriers hadn't been stopped building in 1939 for a couple of years, so they'd been available in 1941, so you'd have had an aircraft carrier. If you'd had an aircraft carrier and 3 or so upgraded D-class cruisers with the 2 battleships, you would have been dealing with a very, very different task force from the perspective of the Japanese attackers than you were dealing with when you were just dealing with 2 battleships. What aircraft did these carry? Well, this is the interesting thing. 2 of them, as I've said, were fitted with Dauntless and Dragon, were fitted with hangars, and basically they seem to be fitted with very early aircraft. Let me see. I've got the aircraft here. Right. If in doubt, always get your Sturvian out. Right then. Let's see. If I remember correctly, they were fitted with right then, these Fairy 3Ds. Okay. So I'm hoping you can see the pictures of them. They're basically, the Fairy 3F is the more famous variant, but the 3D was the one which preceded it. And that's what they were supposed to carry. There was also an idea that some of the ones with the flying off positions above second would just be carrying Panthers. The ones with the hangars would carry the 3Ds, float planes, as sort of scouting aircraft. It really doesn't work well, and they really don't do it for a long time. They stop it quite soon, actually. They do. Yeah, Jack Ray's pointed out, barrel cooling would be better when firing the same amount of shells as well, thus less barrel wear. Yeah, that's the other advantage. If you have a double barrels, to fire the same amount of shells, you are using your individual barrels slightly less and they last slightly longer. But you do also have to carry more ammunition to keep them firing. So it's all the trade-offs. Probably if you'd gone with double guns throughout, they would have had to be far bigger ships. You'd probably be talking... Honestly, once you're adding in everything, you're probably... If the D-Class had been built to double gun designs, and I'm basing this on the idea that they'd have had 5 double positions rather than 6 single positions, you would probably be looking at about 5,500 tons standard, probably about 6,900 tons fully loaded. And I do worry that I can do those figures in the top of my head, and I'm sure a naval architect, if they wanted to, can check and run the simulations, but they come into roughly the same. You spend enough time around these designs, you can learn what they're going to do off the top of your head. Coal adds to buoyancy, oddly. Interesting enough. Thanks, Jeff, for that one. Probably, because it's probably less dense than some of the liquid fuels. There's a lot more air. Steam White. Also, safer to abandon the coal ship. Oil, nasty ignition. Yeah, but you know, oil's so much more efficient in terms of giving you lots of fuel to get everywhere. Okay. King George V has worked on a song. Please reply. I'm not surprised you've worked on the song King George V, but as you like to sing about Hood, suggest you save it for when you're talking about the Special Services Squadron, which is going to be one of the next topics. So, Jeff Beeler, lots of torpedoes, why and how to be used? Well, they've got 4 treble launchers, and this means that they can... Nicest way, they get attacked at any angle, they've got torpedoes they can fire at it. They can give a broadside of 6 torpedoes and 6 guns. See how it works? And if they happen to be chasing an enemy fleet, they can do this, fire, and then turn, fire. Or if they're running away from an enemy fleet, because they're, they can do this, fire, and then this, fire. And they can get them coming backwards. Basically, whichever you're talking about, whatever position, that gives the commanders a lot of options. And it makes these ships very good for independent action, for independent cruising. And this is why we get into the Special Service Squadron. But we'll answer some more questions before we get to that. Very good. In relation to hydrodynamics, were there any effective heavy hydrofoil weapons platforms? Off the top of my head, effective. Effective when they were already up there going at full speed. None which I know of, but I would have to do more more research to give you a absolute perfect answer. Stephen White, Dutch cruiser Java about the same as D-Class. Roughly similar. Stephen Wilson, I've switched computers and even downloaded Chrome, but I still cannot get this live stream. I'll have to watch it tomorrow. I have no problem with recording stuff. I am sorry to hear that. Have you tried on your phone? That probably sounds wrong to say, but sometimes I do find the phone works best with YouTube, according to my students who've been looking at the Sask videos. General McNulty. General, thank you for reminding me that. Evening, Ian. Albert Sabatsky. Would fire control systems in World War I actually handle firing guns in two different directions? Or is the ability to fire guns on the other side on the German cruisers only short range? You have it in one. They really don't carry the fire control systems to do multi-direction fire control, which is kind of an interesting thing. But again, on cruiser guns, they're far more independent. So it's a sort of closer range system. Strange enough, actually, the Royal Navy's D-Class, which technically have less guns, but because of the way their distributed fire control systems work, and because of the way they're set up, then if I go to the design, again, if you're looking at it, there's really fire control positions here, and there's another one sort of back here. They can almost operate as a forward free and a rear free if they need to coordinate their firing. So in a way, actually, the D-Class could actually do a better job with less guns of firing in multiple directions than the German system of having multiple guns on each side. But the German system does make sense if you have that particular setup they have in their terms of engines. Strub, Doctor, could something like a Fletcher be a good commerce radar? If it was stretched a bit and had a bit more fuel. Oh, and Ian, I almost forgot to say, hi to your little girl. Hope she's having a nice time. Well, that's nice to see you can at this precise moment. Ben and Nora, very sore legs from a long cycle, but at least I can like that. Oh. Bilge pumps took up half your cycle. Good lord. Tony Penfold. Shomack, it's a classic Royal Navy refit where you get a very different ship on the other side. Yes. And it works. That's what they're planning. As I said, if you look at HMS Delhi, you see exactly what they're planning. And the ship that comes out is a very different ship. She's got these big general purpose guns. She's got all this sort of air armament. She is in many ways a very much enhanced, larger destroyer. Basically, they're basically turning... They're building their small destroyer, their large fleet destroyers are being built up to light cruiser standards, and their light cruisers are being built to super destroyer standards because their two groups are coming together as one by the end of the 1930s. Tony Pemble, so what other lessons for global presence were incorporated in D-Class? Well, the other point I'd give them is, actually, I will keep banging on about this, is A, they've got the Brown-Curtis geared turbines versus the Parsons ones, and actually the Brown-Curtis ones were considered the slightly more commercially available parts ones, but also they were considered more reliable than the Parsons. And the armour. You've got the same armour fit theoretically as the C-Class, but in D-Class, as you can see on this one, it shows where you've got 3-inch armour all the way along here. You've got 2.5-inch armour all the way down there with 1.5-inch going over the front. And you've got 1-inch box armour going around the magazines, which are internal behind this armour plate. So that means you have 2 layers of armour covering your magazines. That's, again, a great thing for survivability if you're far away from home. Mm-hmm. General McCullough? Yeah, sure. Okay. Doctor, why did the Special Squadron not include destroyers? Well, let's start off with the Special Squadron, because we're going to get to them now. Because if I'm going to talk about the 1920s, I have to talk about the Special Service Squadron, and they are so pretty. Okay. The Special Service Squadron, and this is in part 2 of the introduction, if anyone's looking for it. Now, let's go down right to the bottom. We've got there. Okay. Why did the Special Service Squadron not include destroyers? Well, there aren't any destroyers which can really go this range. For their operations, they don't at any point pass through the Mediterranean. If they'd been going through the Mediterranean, they would have taken some destroyers on them. But their whole route going around the world is this: there aren't destroyers which have the range to keep up with them at the time, and get back without a lot of supplies. Whereas, if you consider these ships, if you consider the good old D-class, they have a range of 6,700 nautical miles at 10 knots. Now, at 14 knots, which is what the group mainly did this trips round, they can actually do about 4,500 nautical miles. So, if you consider again the jumps around the world, the maximum of them is roughly, it's this one from Honolulu. They go Fiji Islands to Honolulu, up to Victoria. They're about 4,500. They're well underneath 4,500 miles, so they can refuel as they go. And actually, it's considered quite nice to the Americans, especially at Honolulu. They have a huge party when they're there. It's lovely. The American Navy loves it. The Royal Navy's turning up with brand new cruisers which look really spick and span, and I'm telling you, they look gorgeous. If I can find my picture from the 1920s. Right then, let's check it. No. Yeah. This is HMS Danny and how she looked in 1924. Look at that ship. That turning up looks spick and span. Imagine that in 3D in real life. That is a ship which is going to look impressive. Then imagine that you've got a Navy turning up with 5 of these and 2 big battle cruisers. This is a Royal Navy basically going, look at us. We're powerful, we're here, we're present. We've got the capabilities. And what you have to remember is this is a economic warfare statement. This is a present statement, because if you're dealing with, if you hear there's a British surface raider out there, you have to start acting as if you are facing against a battle cruiser. So you have to you have to start organising your formations based on them encountering a battle cruiser. The reality is they're probably if there's a British surface raider out there, it's going to be in the 1920s a D-class cruiser or a county-class cruiser. That is what you're most likely going to be fighting. But the trouble is, you won't know until you get very accurate information. And if there is one battle cruiser out there, and there are 4 light cruisers, which is probably how the Royal Navy would be rolling, you could be tracking down the battle cruiser and the light cruisers will be mopping everything up. Or you can start tracking down the light cruisers and spread out to try and track down those 4 small ships, and then your forces, which could individually take on a light cruiser, will suddenly find themselves near a battle cruiser, which will go, "Are you hunting my little friends? You really hunting my little friends? Oh, I'm sorry, did I sink you? You're no longer hunting my little friends." And that is what Hood and Repulse were for. That is the Royal Navy's economic strategy, and that is why they're going round this part of the world. They're showing everyone, these are the parts of the world where you do not have battle fleets. Where your battle fleets do not rarely if ever go. We can get there very easily. You have to respect us, listen to us, and we won't go there. In car. Why were so many of the earlier C-class cruisers scrapped in the interwar period? Was it this because of treaty limitations and new ships being built? It's because of new ships being built. It's also because the earlier building of the C-class cruisers were really far more rushed in many respects than the later ones. So they were they were withstanding the rigors of time far less. They'd done far more wartime service for starters, and they'd had far more issues in wartime to deal with. So, you know, the hulls take a beating. Bidron, how did the class compare to US and Omaha class cruisers? US ships designed for battle fleet service, but had to be able to cross the Pacific. Let me remind myself about the Omaha class. Mainly because the other day I found myself talking on one of these lives about one class, and then I went, oh, I was talking about different class, their predecessors. Well, they're ordered slightly later. The Omaha class are built in part, I would argue, as a response to the D class. When I ever look at them, and you know, they can cross oceans, they can do things, but they are built in part as a response to the D class. But they're generally a lot bigger. They have 90,000 ship horsepower. They are 169 meters in length. They are far bigger ships. And again, this is sort of, you can understand it because it's the Americans are building the ships, but they're building the ships in response to what the Royal Navy's building. Okay. Stromac, the MRs were built for a concept of ludicrously fast scouting force which comprised the design. That is the thing. I'm looking at them, and honestly, one of the things that interests me is that their belt is 3-inch armor, but their deck's 1.5-inch, conning tower, bulkheads. Yeah. The D-class carry more torpedoes, so if I was a battleship, I'd actually be more worried about the D-class than I would an Omaha. But the Omaha is still pretty cool. Pretty good kind of ships. They're designed for what the US Navy wants them for. The US Navy is looking for a scout cruiser. The Royal Navy is looking for a commerce raider / presence ship / deterrent against the Japanese and the Americans actually kicking off in the Far East. And if there was a part of the reason why, for the Royal Navy, actually having a slightly less capable ship does an advantage here. Remember what I told you, have said several times in other videos about when you're doing deterrence, what matters is having a very capable fleet that can deploy, and they know it can, the enemy know it can deploy. When you're actually turning up, it helps to have a ship which they cannot be offended by in terms of they can't go, oh, you're bullying me. Well, if you turn up with a D class, yes, we all know it's very capable because we know about its armor, we know about its torpedoes, we know about its, you know, its guns and its Navy crew. They're all going to be very good, but it doesn't look super. It has presence, but it doesn't look like an intimidating presence. It looks more like a very nice, well-dressed gentleman turning up to give you, or a well-dressed person turning up to give you a, you know, a stern talking to. The fact that they have then a whole load of thugs behind them ready to come and to bash you in doesn't matter. You can't. The thugs are hidden behind the curtain. You don't see them until you decide not to listen to the gentleman. Double gun diesel Leanders. Actually, that. Actually, there's been something interesting the whole time I've been looking at them, because I knew I recognised the hull type. That's the D-class hull, and that's the improved Leander hull. And to me, now you've pointed that out, well, reminding me of that, Jeff, I think you could well be onto something. Could definitely be onto something. The D-Class are definitely the forward of many, many things. Oh, good lord. I use birthday cards for some of my bookmarks and some of these newer books. It's so I don't lose the birthday cards or the books. Sure, Mac, I don't know how why the USN goes for a 21 knot battle line and then a scouting force that goes 35 knots. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Okay, so let me explain this one. What matters is your cruising speed in terms of scouting. Your top speed is about being able to pull ahead. This is, you know, if you consider the D-Class, their top speed is 29 knots, which is actually slower than the C-Class, which is 29.5 knots, which is why I say they're not just a simple development of the C-Class. If you were just developing the C-Class, you would have gone, more speed. When actually they went, we'll accept half a knot less. And the reason you're doing that is because that's your surge speed, so you can get into position. And then you canter down to your cruising speed and you keep going. That's the important point. You need to be able to speed up, to chug ahead, to get into position, and then you need to be able to slow down. So you have a 35 knot top speed, that's great. But that's so you can keep in position in relative to your 21 knot formation of your battle line. Sam Thompson, Doctor, speaking of barrel cooling, has any Navy ever tried a water jacket like the Maxim gun, or did they not get hot enough to worry about warping? Really, naval guns tend to be a lot thicker and a lot bigger than land-based guns, so they don't not have to worry about a water jacket or that sort of thing, or warping, because they have more space to dissipate the heat. That tends to be how to work. Furry Kitten, is that homeopathic iron brew you're on? I've been told it's almost effective as placebo. Probably. Strub, Doctor, why is the 50 cal M2 machine gun staying in service so long? It works. Basically, these things work. If they work, they stay along service for a while. Ooh, good lord. Okay. Furrican, would torpedoes in a squadron be deployed purposefully as area denial weaponry to force the opponent into a more effective gun firing solution, or are they far too valued to be used in such a manner? Okay, so, again, one of the things I'll bring up in this one is the 1920s and 1930s of what they're doing. So, 1920s and 1930s, so part 1, part 2. Now, some of the doctrines that they are doing actually do have the idea of using torpedoes, or at least the fear of torpedoes, to force the enemy into certain maneuvers. Not necessarily into a gun position, but if you've managed to use your Abdeel class mine layer or something else to lay some mines in an appropriate position, and you happen to be close to certain straits or certain choke points leading to Singapore, etc., launching your torpedoes at an enemy, which will force them to take maneuvers which will take them into a minefield, is certainly one of the plans that are put in place and one of the plans considered. It is an idea. Okay, so Dan Hall, why did Diomede have a funky A-turret? Well, here's the thing. The Royal Navy has built AT ships, and as I've said before, the Royal Navy does tend to like to experiment these things. And some of the other ships subsequent to Diomede also gets the funky turret. And basically, that's one step in the Royal Navy thinking about how to improve this class. And already, even as building, they're thinking, well, hang on, what happens if we take the mountings away and we put in turrets? And so we have turreted 6-inch guns. And therefore, we can give the crew slightly more protection. Most of all, we can give them protection against weather. Because what people don't think about is that, especially turrets on a lighter ship, they're not much armor. So, in other words, it's not really going to be much of protection if you're hit. And actually, the argument used on destroyers to keep them in the mounting positions they were with just shields was actually the crew were often safer if they weren't in a confined space if it was hit than if they were in a confined space, because if you're in a confined space the force of the effects of the explosion are magnified, whereas if it's an open space it pierces the shield, goes off, boom. Well, if you've managed to duck behind cover you're probably going to be okay, whereas if you're in confined space it doesn't matter where you are or in the turret, you're going to be conked to pieces. But one of the problems is if you're operating in very big seas and you have lots of water troughing around and lots of rain, etc., and you're trying to fire these guns, it gets problematic. So they try with Diomede the idea of putting on a gun, putting her in a turret. And this is another reason why I point out that the 4.5-inch BD systems could have been used like they were using on the battle class. Interesting enough, if they had been using those for the D-class cruisers, they would have been upping production of them to do it, which would have meant they'd have had more production of those going quicker, and that might have meant that the battle class could well have been, or even the tribal class might have been fitted with them themselves. Tribal class being fitted with 4.5-inch BD turrets, that would have been an interesting experience. That's a slightly modified tribal design, but you know, it's one of those things of history. If you had in 1934-35 Henderson be able to start bringing in the D-class for the upgrades, which he was looking at them, at the same time as we bring in the C-class. So the C-class was going to be transformed into AA cruisers, the D-class into a sort of more general purpose AA cruiser. It's an interesting idea going through. D-class could do it partially because of the armor around their magazines. It meant they had a stronger structure. Blue Ship Builder. General McAuliffe was in temporary command of the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. I'm going to stand with you, Blue Ship Builder, if that's what you're saying. I trust you. My memory of American generals at the moment is not something I trust, because I haven't managed to done my annual summer rewatching of Band of Brothers. Do it every year. I watch Band of Brothers and I watch The Pacific over again. Good times every summer. Usually I actually save them for I probably shouldn't say this with Ian watching this, but I often save them for the summer schools, and I put Band of Brothers on for the students in the evening, because quite a lot of the students enjoy Band of Brothers, because they suddenly go, oh, there's that famous actor and that famous actor, and they're all watching and they're going, there are all these famous actors in these programs. Yes, they are. Ian Carr, how would logistics work with US 5-inch guns on Delhi? Thank you to Americans. They supplied quite a lot of them. Basically, Delhi was working with the Eastern she did a bit of work in the European theatre, but basically was working with the Eastern Fleet and was doing some work with the Pacific Fleet. So there was usually American 5-inch supplies around. General McAuliffe was in temporary command again, Blue Ship Builder. So, Jeff Beeler, how much were the bridges an improvement? Oh. Let's put it this way. When we start looking at HMS Dispatch and HMS Delhi, and you look at the different bridge structures being used, you can start to see the improvement in terms of visibility, in terms of support, but also in terms of spacing. It was broadened a bit by about 12 inches, or what everyone else would call roughly 30 centimeters, but that does make a big difference. But let's be honest, Delhi does look good like this, but imagine her with double 4.5 inches there and there. Oh, I get chills just imagining it. She'd have been so pretty. And she was actually down to be the first upgraded as well, if she had it. Delhi just gets everything. Okay. Martin Dory, was Diomede used as a trial ship the same as Enterprise? As I heard, Enterprise trialed the use of turrets rather than mounts. Diomede was used as a trial ship. Lots of them were used as trial ships. Basically, the more the Royal Navy builds ships, the more they like to play trials with them. Sure, Mac, the bronze on white really puts me off. I can understand your perspective, but it was called the Victorian scheme or the colonial scheme, depending on who you were. It was the Victorian fleet, and it's a traditional Royal Navy's image in the world. And it's no surprise that the US Navy apes it when they're doing their Great White Fleet and these sort of things, because the US Navy is shamelessly in a way, complimenting the Royal Navy, but also shamelessly going, look, who is the most respected Navy in the world for going around the world? It's the Royal Navy. Why do they look like this? Why are they white hulls and yellow structure? Well, this is where the yellow structure is slightly easier to keep clean, but more importantly, it looks really good when the sun is rising and the sun is setting. It provides really evocative images at those times. And it really sort of sets the ship apart as a two-stroke. And if you can imagine the sailors all in their uniforms, looking all resplendent, officers, everyone in blue, everyone sort of looking in position, or dress whites for the Far East, occasionally in white shorts, their legs probably suitably tanned in the sun. The whole thing the Royal Navy's going for is, we are a fit, athletic, very well trained, very capable force. This is our impression. Although I'm still, again, it's things like HMS, calling a ship HMS Desperate. I can understand it, but modern connotations of the phrase, I don't think it works. But, I can understand there is a history behind it. And wearing shorts. I'm sorry, this is not that I don't own a pair of shorts. I have been known to wear shorts in terms of when it's very, very hot and there is a suitable scenario for it, i.e. I'm going kayaking or something like that. Other than that, why are you wearing shorts? This looks like, it just reminds me of school days. Donald Fritz, how protected were the gunners on CLs that only had gun shields versus full turrets? Well, as I said, the full turret is not going to have that much armor, so you're still going to get penetrated. So you have protection against something light like machine gun fire, and if the shell is just exploding nearby, then you've got protection from that. So you've got protection from a nearby explosion and these sort of things. But if you get a direct hit, it's worse. King George V. Wait, is the D-Class HMS Danny? Yes, Danny is the first of the D-Class. Danny Freeman. HMS Danny and Dragon all seems a bit of Game of Thrones. It gets very Game of Thrones once you read the full four. Let's be honest. The ships which are cancelled are Daedalus, Daring, Desperate, and Dryad. Yeah, it all gets very mystical. Very, very mystical very quickly. Martin Doherty. Was Diomede used as a trial ship? I've answered that one, I think. Fury Kitten. So the D class is the embodiment of speak softly and carry big stick. They definitely are. And I will remind people, because just in case they've forgotten, this is Thursday night, so Mysteries of the Deep is on at 9 o'clock. So I will finish this at 8:30. So I'll be on for another hour and 20 minutes. Because, you know, I get some tea and watch myself on the Discovery Channel. I'm not sure what I'm up to this week, but I know I'm in there doing something. Sure, Mac. Britain isn't angry, it's just disappointed. That is exactly what the D class was for. It's sort of, instead of sending a big burly bouncer, it's basically the equivalent of sending your bank manager. Okay, right then, yeah, okay, so, yeah, I apologize. Or maybe instead of the PE teacher coming over, looking all big and scary, it's the headmaster coming around going, seriously? Martin Doherty, the bow of the D class were replicated in towns. The bow of the D class come across in many, many ships, actually. The bow of the D class is a very good design. Danny Freeman, the British Empire has noticed you. You don't want us to become disappointed in you now, do you? Yeah. If we become disappointed in you, then a county turns up and goes, really? I was having a lovely party in Way Highway, and you have made me leave my party and my ball just to come and deal with you lot mucking about and being silly. D1. Danny used only for scouting and escort with sisters, so missed Java C debacle. Could it and sisters make a difference there, except aside from more casualties? Well, that's the thing. In their unmodified version, no, they can't really make a difference. In their modified version, I'm not sure if the 4.5s could really match up against cruisers. Certainly their torpedoes might have had an advantage, but again, they would have diffused the targeting because you'd have had more targets to take on from the Japanese perspective, but the Japanese were still had the advantage of range. I go into Java C quite a bit in my HMS Exeter paper on global maritime history. Honestly, I don't think so. I think even with their 4.5s, if they'd had the upgrade, they would have been more task force ships and certainly vessels. To help out at Java C, you needed town class cruisers. If you were going to have anything, you needed either more counties or you needed town class cruisers. You needed something which had a lot of bark and a lot of bite. And these weren't going to be it. These were going to be your lighter presence escort cruisers, task force cruisers. If Java C was fought with World War I tech in 1920, yeah, these would have made a huge difference to Java C in 1920. But Java C, when it happens, no. Donald Fitz, how do you keep sailors from falling off small ships that only have gun shields in high seas when you have shooting to be done? You have a lot of practice at it, and you do your best to make sure that they don't fall off. They also there are some railings and things around, and there are various how do I put this, methods they have in terms of routes to get to places. King George V, we are doing the, we're doing the Special Service Squadron and what the Presence mission of the class. So if you're going to put your song, I suppose now is the time to do it. But please do not spam the messages. Remember, there are lots of people who want to ask questions, and I don't want to lose track of them. Jaderson, I tricked my wife into Band of Brothers by telling her Tom Hardy was in it and got naked. He was in it and only had 30-second screen time. Yes, but that probably made her happy. We can always we can hope. Well, happy enough that she didn't kill you for it. I don't think I've made my girlfriend watch Band of Brothers yet. Knowing her, she's probably already seen it. If she hasn't, I will have to introduce her to it. Jeff Beeler, Scylla and Shabidus with 4.5s give us an idea of what modernized Ds would have been like. Yeah, that's pretty much, that does give us a bit of an idea. They'd have been pretty capable ships. They were basically supersized destroyers. And that's what they'd have been fitted as. Inca, why were 2D class rather than any remaining C class used as Mulberry Harbour block ships after D-Day? Well, as I pointed out in part 2, one of them wasn't supposed to be used as ORP Dragon was not supposed to be used as a block ship, but she felt sorry that her fellow Scott-built ship had been used as a block ship, so she decided to get herself damaged and became another block ship. But also there's the fact that the C-Class have to be refitted earlier in the war. So the C-Class have been refitted. And therefore are still very useful after 1942. But after 1942, you've got new ships coming online. You've got more Didos. You've got battles being built. You've got the new generations of larger destroyers coming in. You've got tribals, multiple types, thanks to the Canadians and the Australians, more of them. You've got all sorts of ships coming in. You now no longer have the pressure. It's one of those interesting things. If the D-Class had been upgraded, had needed to be upgraded earlier, they would probably have survived in the front line till the end of World War II. But because they didn't, because they were newer ships than the C-Class, they weren't upgraded. So by the time it came to the options to upgrade them, it was a case of, do we upgrade them or do we get rid of them? Well, Delhi got upgraded in 1941, so she's still in use. The ones which weren't upgraded earlier in the war, they got rid of because you've got newer ships coming online, so you might as well use the newer ships. And you've only got so many crew. I've already answered, would the 3Ds available been useful if added to the Prince of Wales and Repulse in 4C? Not in their form as they were. If they'd been upgraded to their 4.5-inch gun form, they could have been. Especially if they'd been, as I said, basically for 4C to work, you needed to have not stopped building the aircraft carriers. So you need to have kept the aircraft carrier program building, so you'd have had about 3, possibly 4 more aircraft carriers in the fleet in 1941. So you'd have definitely been able to generate one for 4C, possibly 2. And you would have needed to upgrade it all D-Class to the 4.5-inch gun standard, which you could have done if you'd started in 1932. And that would have been it. That would have been quite a powerful thing. Okay, right. So, Thomas Rottweiler. I'm not going to repeat it out loud because, A, my little cousins might be watching this, as well as my mother and girlfriend. But leaving that to one side, and my girlfriend's mom as well. But also, basing for that is it's actually HMS Come On If You Think You're Hard Enough, and that is HMS Gurkha. Because that is pretty much what HMS Gurkha is. You have a choice. You can either name a ship HMS Come On If You Think You're Hard Enough. Are you really hard enough? Do you really want to do this? Or you can name her HMS Gurkha. Either will work as the same thing, but let's be honest, HMS Gurkha is far easier to write on a name plaque, and also gets you made less fun of in the port. Richard Hughes, to be truly English, you wear socks with sandals. To be truly English, you walk bare feet. Barican, HMS Disastrous, HMS Despair, HMS Dysfunctional. How come these names were missed? Oh, God. Daniel Freeman, HMS Druid? I think that's what HMS Dryad pretty much is leading towards, but, you know. Blue Shipbuilder, yes, HMS Desperate, really. There had been 3 prior to it. And there was actually supposed to be the 1949 class of D-class destroyers, Darings, which I wrote in a book about. One of them was supposed to be called HMS Desperate, but was magically renamed. Or, you know, technically cancelled. But the one that was supposed to be renamed Desperate was renamed, and then the one which was supposed to had the name Desperate transferred to it was cancelled. Bidron, at first in 1880s, the ABC squadron of cruisers of the USN were painted like HMS Warrior. For a squadron of evolution, they were painted white. Yes. And that's the point. When you're going around the world for a presence mission, you want to stick out. You want to be as bright, resplendent, but also in a way non-threatening. You want to be a powerful presence without being overtly aggressive. White and gold are good colours for this. They look majestic. Albert Zapsky, RN could actually have used the D-class refitted ZA cruisers in the Mediterranean colonies. Regardless today, the 4 or 4.5 inch in dual A amounts was 5.25 inch also an option or too heavy. Really, the 5.25 would have required too much work done to their existing systems. The 4.5 inch was the best one for their systems. 4 inch could have been done. You could easily do, if you can fit in a 4.5, you can fit in a 4, but it, you know. Basically, the 4-inch C-class were used for that job, for the AA cruiser jobs. If you'd had some D-class with 4.5 as well along, that would have been very, very useful. Jeff Beeler, are we doing E-class today? No, we're going to do the E-class, I think, probably in August, if people would like it to do that, because I think I'm going to work through the classes of cruisers. I quite like doing these cruiser profiles. Actually, I have to say, what I'm currently working on, and I have sitting in front of me, and I've been working on this morning when I was technically supposed to be, after I'd finished the videos, but when I was technically supposed to be working on finishing my references, I was actually working on my ships of the Convoy War, the Battle of the Atlantic in steel, and looking up the various versions of various ship types I'm going to be using. It's probably going to have an introduction which is 4 parts long and includes 8 classes. Now, interesting question. Why weren't there the Leanders, the F class? Well, that's because there is a reason there is an HMS Frobisher in the Hawkins class. Because the Hawkins class basically take the precedence of the F class. So rather than lose those names, what the Royal Navy does is they mix in all sorts of names that they would have been used. The Pacific series is good. There is some love for that. I always watch that. I always do the Band of Brothers, and then I do the Pacific. King George V. It's fine, I won't do my song. See ya. I hope you haven't gone, because it's always fun to have characters on the chat. I do enjoy having characters on the chat. Stafford Thompson, how about some love? No, Anzac's far better series, Doc. I haven't managed to watch that yet. I keep looking to watch it, but I haven't managed to have the time to sit down and watch it properly. Ferrican, given that the rate of advance of weaponry is slowing down between gunnery, missiles, and attack nukes, how important would it be to build more adaptable naval platforms opposed to dedicated weapon systems? You see, there was this big talk a few years ago, about its systems, not systems, not platforms. What matters is we have these weapon systems, and the platforms can be anything. Actually, to support those systems, you need decent general purpose platforms. You need some good platforms. So I'd have said, actually, it's always platforms. But what matters is you have those platforms designed that you can easily upgrade the systems on them. So, yeah. Basically, like the C class, the D class were done. They were built at the end of the First World War, but they were built in such a way that the Royal Navy could upgrade them as time went on. In the middle of war, the Royal Navy is still thinking about, hang on, future conflicts, we need to have some space built into these ships. They are built with space built into them for upgrading. And you've got the plans. They're done in the 1930s, which is why it's so quick and easy. You know, HMS Delhi is upgraded from basically looking like this to looking like this in a couple of months in a foreign port, because the plans are already there and they're able to be adapted quite quickly. Jennifer, does that make HMS Eskimo? HMS, how many times do I have to tell you? Possibly. Possibly. It also makes HMS Ashanti HMS, you missed me. You missed me again. You missed me. You keep trying to hit me, and you missed me. You missed me. And then there's HMS Nubian. Hello, where are you? Daniel Freeman, again, because of the earlier context of who might be watching, I'm not going to repeat that particular discussion, but it did make me laugh. Stafford Thompson, Doctor, may I make a possible topic suggestion for me? Swaff, the most stable cat. Well, I'll have a look into it. Balinora, pre-dreadnoughts have the Majestics. Are there... have the Majestics as their main jumping off point. What is the equivalent for protected cruisers, light cruisers, if there is one? Ooh. I know where Drac draws his line, and I have to say I do agree with that in some extent, but... Ooh. Give me a second. Now, Drac would usually say it's the Ellswick cruisers, which are sort of begin them. But when I'm talking about Royal Navy cruisers, especially these ones, I would tend to go... all the way back to the adventure class is what I really start off with, as I would understand it. But they're the scout cruisers beginning. They're the ones that begin the light cruiser role. I guess you barely already meant roll some. Just heard someone calling from me. I'll be back in a second. The interesting thing about the Z class, and the interesting thing that I think about them, is that even though they're built pre, and I say this with all due respect, pre treaties, they are, well, they are built in such a respect that they actually, they are giving sort of some of the tenets that will be used to get around the treaties later on when the treaties are done. They've got the armor around magazines because you can't put enough armor around the ship, so you protect the magazines. You know, and there are all sorts of ideas put in them, even though they haven't got those limitations. Egging George V. James Bassett novels Harm's Way has in the end, at the USA and IJN naval battle, an old World War I Australian cruiser joining the American battle line. From its description, it sounds like a Danny class cruiser. It probably is something based on a Danny class cruiser. There are a few which do not look that dissimilar to Danny class. Yeah, there's all sorts of options when it comes to them. They do have lots of cruisers, which could be a basis for them. But the Royal Navy and the Australian Navy, the Commonwealth navies and the Dominion navies do produce some very similar ships in terms of what they're needing. Dave Burnham, have you talked about Deliana 5-inch 38s? I can talk some more about them. I have mentioned them, but I can talk some more about them. Furrican, given the remit of the current RM, would you think building a prestige vessel worthwhile? I think a presence vessel, I think the Type 31s are being built along presence lines. I think once you're looking at building, you start talking about global Britain, you start talking about having global presence, and you're forward basing ships for presence in places like Bahrain, possibly in Gibraltar, possibly in Singapore, possibly in the Falkland Islands. You do start having to think along lines of what ship's going to give us presence. And the thing is, the Type 26 is a very good ship for fighting. But I would argue the Type 31 has more lines of presence. And I argue the Type 45s, again, are a bit too... They're a bit too mission-focused to be so impactful on the presence. You could have made them like that, but they didn't. Maybe if they give them a tumble down hull, Tumblr Bow sort of scenario, they'd have been had more presence. Then, what's the R in ordering building cruisers like these too quickly to learn lessons for next crop to optimize the designs from one to next? Not really, because the RN had a far larger force at this point, and they were able to be sort of developing as they're ongoing. Plus, in the nicest way, the classes themselves, even within them, had development. So, you know, there are certain parts of the C class. On the D class, when it's called a continuation of the C class, isn't a continuation of the original C class. It's a continuation of the Carlyles, which were the last, well, the Kairos and the Carlyles. It depends on your perspective, who you are, on which subclass you call them, whether the Cairo or the Carlisle class. It's like with HMS Belfast is more famous, but HMS Edinburgh is built first. So in my view, she's part of the Edinburgh subclass, but some people call them the Belfast subclass of the town class cruisers. Again, with the Carlisle and the Kairos, the sort of, I would call them the Kairos normally, but I've been reading about 4 books today which call them the Carlisle class. These ships, they are the last generation of the C class, and in many ways the D class can be continued, as I said, as sort of continuations of them, but there's a lot of other factors going on. Tony Pendleton, yes, please keep it serious. It's fascinating to suggest how much pre-planning occurs and technology advancement integration happens and individual ship histories. That's the trying to balance it all out and sort of give you sort of the introductions to give you the introductions, as it were, to these things, and then to look at them. And there are notable events. It's one of those things I sort of like. When I'm looking at the 1930s and 1920s, some of the notable events, which are pretty cool. You know, there's the Baltic Squadron, which has Dauntless, it has Delhi, it has all sorts of ships taking part on it. Danny also goes out there at one point. And you have the fact that Danny comes into World War One and is actually there in presence in the Harwich force for the end of World War One. And you sort of look at the cruisers which the Royal Navy started World War One with in the Harwich force, and what they end World War One with in the Harwich force, and there is a quantum leap. You can see how these years of wars have affected them. Very kitten. If utilising historical designing a modern variant, if you were to commission a ship to show the flag and press natives, so to speak, what would you design? I would probably take something the size of Type 31. The question is whether I would fit it with a double 4.5s on the front, like the Darings. VLS, strike length missiles, but also air defense and those sort of things in a sort of VLS system. Probably distributed VLS, so you'd have some air defense VLS between round the gun mounts at the front, and another air defense VLS sort of aft. Strike length anti-ship ones in the center. Have a couple of, probably have 3 40mm actually, 3 of the new 40mm Bofors systems, and have, you know, sort of based off 2 sort of on sponsons forward waist and 1 aft over the hangar, so she has good all-round fire. And, you know, just generally a potent looking ship. Definitely would have the ability to launch and recover things sternwards, as well as a hangar on the flight deck sternwards. So underneath the flight deck would have, I don't think it would be a dock, I think it would be a ramp of some kind, but I'm not sure which type I'd go for, whether the one with a door or without a door. Probably with a door, it looks cooler. decent weapons, but nothing too sort of overtly fancy. But you know, the heavy gun fit does tend to work as a sort of presence. And if you have those 40mm, then have the 30mm with the new missiles as well fitted as well. Have a couple of those, have one of those on each side as well. So you have sort of quite a heavy gun fit for dealing with a range of options for graduated firing if a commander needs it. Tony Peville, so how did the RN collect all lessons learned from experience and incorporate them into next design? What was the organisation? Well, you had the third Sea Lord and you had the first Sea Lord, but also you had the different commands. And what would happen is captains would write reports, XOs would write reports, occasionally other officers would write the reports, especially in the first in class. Their squadron, their flotilla, squadron, fleet commanders would all write reports on how they viewed their performance, and those would go back in, and they would filter straight back into the third Sea Lord very quickly, and their department would look at them, the Director of Naval Construction would look at them. There would also often be representatives of the DNC and the third Sea Lord aboard ships when they were at sea for the first few months, looking at how they were operating. So very quickly back, information would get back, moving back to them. David, remarkable how advanced the RN designs of the light cruiser was over the USN Scout cruiser of the Omaha class, near contemporary. Yes, well, actually, the Omaha class comes afterwards. That's the interesting thing. Sentatsiesen? And hopefully I haven't mispronounced your name. Any particular reason why destroyers, even big ones, didn't have triple turrets to save space for other ordnance and electronics? Pretty much it's the complexity of putting in a triple turret and the space for it. Double turrets are double mounts are fairly easy and straightforward. Once you've got a triple one, you've got complexities. Because basically, what to do with double one is you mount the two mounts side by side and you have them orientated just flip round. Okay, you have the things built to flip round. That's simplifying it a bit, but it's quite simple to do in a way. You can have it. Once you have three, you then have a third one. If you go inside HMS Belfast and you're in one of the turrets looking up, you'll notice the most complicated system going up is the one which feeds the shells up from the magazine, up through the base of the turret to the middle gun, the centerline gun. That is the most complicated of the things. You have space for that in a 10,000-ton town class cruiser. You don't have space for it in a smaller vessel. It gets very complicated. Jeff Beeler, was Delhi better built? She saw more action than the rest of the fleet and got the Fletcher refit. Delhi was used as the flagship, which meant that she got a lot of precedence in things, and then in 1941 she gets the refit. She's been damaged, so she sent for refit in the United States, so she gets the rebuild. Once she has the rebuild, she's therefore going to be used more. Basically, it's one of those scenarios. If you've been refitted, it's like the C-class again. If you've been refitted prior to 1942 and you're upgraded, you are proof for the rest of the war. You are something useful. If post 1942 you get damaged, or they've got another new ships coming on, and you haven't had a major refit prior to 1942, the odds are they're going to cut you because they've got newer ships to replace you with. You're no longer as useful. So that's why Delhi gets more service. Dave Benham, we went over this on Twitter. Guinness beats Iron Brew, so it's the Belfast class. Iron Brew beats everything, David. Iron Brew beats everything. And you must remember, Edinburgh's a double threat. They've got whiskey and Iron Brew. Martin Simmons, do you think the evolution of warship design led to the C&D cruisers really being replaced by C&D class destroyers, or am I barking up the wrong tree? I would say that very much by the time you get to the Daring class destroyers post World War II, that is what this class, that is what are stepping into the role of these ships, them and definitely then the county class destroyers after them, are stepping into the roles which these ships had left behind. Good afternoon, Atomic Babel. Steve Mike, till I was 25, I thought I was the only warship nerd in the world. I'm not allowed. Not alone. Thank you, Stephen. No one's alone. Trust me. Jeff Beeler, HMS Gurkha, the Type 31. Very keen. I must admit, from what I have seen, the new Bofors systems are beyond impressive, and smart, targetable, reconfigurable ammunition is fascinating. Yes, it is. This is again why I would like them to have double 4.5s or 5 inches on the front, 2 of them, 2 doubles, so they've got 4 of those in my perfect design, and you've got 3 of the 40mm, so you've got a nice heavy around fire system which provides cover. If you add in some 30mm, then you don't really need a close-in weapon system. So you've got 2 30mm with the Martlet missiles mounts, so for mounts. You've got those. You can then go, right then, we have a annoying Iranian boat over there in our Strait of Hms. Point the 30mm at them. If that doesn't work, point the 40mm at them. If that doesn't work, hello, have you met the 4.5-inch guns? And if that doesn't work, you then fire a 30mm burst. They still don't retire, you can fire a 40mm burst in front of them. And they're going, oh, okay, well, yeah, that doesn't work. You fire a 4.5 in front of them. The trouble is their boats are so small that even if you miss them, that will probably make them flip over. But, you know, accidents happen. Paul Johnson, what name would you resurrect for one of the new ships, either Type 26 or Type 31? Type 26 is already being renamed the Town class. They're called the City class, but they're using the Town class name. So, in the nicest way, those are. If I was in for 31s, I'd probably be going for Battle class, if I had my way. Atomic Babel, weld decks and stern ramps are design nightmares. They are, but stern ramps are incredibly useful for launching and recovering fast boats and surface and the small surface unmanned surface vessels and small and sort of unmanned unmanned underwater vessels and these sort of things. So that's what it's a design might work, but it's a payoff. Plus, it allows you to retrofit them with a towed sonar array if you want to as well. Marnish Doherty would love to see one of the Type 45s painted in the colonial buff and yellow. Ooh, that could be very good. Stephen White, Dorito was a Dutch design like a cut-down Grass B. Was this purposeful? Means it looks meaner than Java, Sumatra and Trump. Still not much stronger. I wouldn't be surprised, but again. Bishop, the Randus cruiser in harm's way is HMAS Diadem. Described as looking like a relic from Dewey's triumphant Millennium Bay, with 2 line funnels bracketing a fat one. Obviously not a real historic ship. 2 line funnels bracketing a fat one. You see, the thing is, you say not a historic ship, but that's pretty much a description of an early county class. That is HMS Norfolk. And even before that, there is some sort of similarities in the Hawkins class as well. It's interesting. Yeah, fun times. Beat Exley, what is your opinion on battle thrusters and warships? I support them. I like having extra powers, but you have to make sure you have the power for them. Thurican, what class of ship is a total destructive trap along lines of does my... Cannon class cruisers. Basically, if they turn up and you don't call them pretty, then they get really pissy with you. They burn them, but the Irish have whiskey and Guinness. Well, actually, no, that's not that. You see, the thing is, the advantage of iron brew and whiskey is you're a double threat. You've both got the soft drinks and the alcoholic drinks, so you can get people coming and going. With whiskey and Guinness, it's only alcoholic, so it's very strong, but it's a single threat. Daniel, World War II. Dorita was designed with a lot of German assistance. However, it's not really a powerful combat vessel. Its function was a flagship or a surface scouting force for the submarines. Yeah, actually, I would say it was quite good for its size, but you have to remember it's in Dutch level powerful, okay? If you're looking at Royal Navy level powerful and Dutch level powerful, these are different things at this time. What is a Dutch Navy? Are they a major Navy? Are they a medium power Navy? If they're a medium power Navy, what are they trying to do? What do they want out of it? You know, are they looking for a ship which is going to go massively offensive? Or do they want a ship which can hold their own but be a secondary part of what will probably be a coalition force? Especially if they're fighting in the Far East, which is what they're looking at. The Dutch are worried about the Japanese as well. So what are they expecting they're going to have to do? Slot in probably with the Royal Navy and the US Navy in a war against Japan. That is what the Dutch are expecting to have to do. Or possibly defend their own islands. Trent Dunker. Another Battle of the Java Sea question. Any difference if there was a town class instead of HMS Exeter for Abda Command? Okay, I prefer the town class than HMS Exeter. I would always say that. I like HMS Exeter, but I always feel that she's a Class B heavy cruiser, and to make her build her, they make all sorts of concessions in her design, some which aren't even visible, but which are there. I don't know if a town class would make a big difference versus Exeter there. I think what would have made a difference is if you could have a couple of town class there and a couple of proper full-up counties. I think you need a lot more firepower out there. And I think the trouble is, the other advantage would have made is if you'd had, I don't know, is if Prince of Wales and Repulse were still floating around. Because if they'd been there would have been a very different Battle of the Java Sea. But there again, if they'd spin all around, the Japanese would have probably sent a lot more firepower as well down that way. But my whole point with Prince of Wales and Repulse is that, frankly, if you're going to deploy two battleships, you shouldn't have deployed them to Singapore. You should have deployed them to the Indian Ocean and then built up a fleet around them so they could move back. So they could either take a strong force to reinforce Singapore in the event of invasion of Malaya, or they could then surge past Singapore. You don't want them there, so they have to respond, because the moment you have them there, they have to do what Admiral Phillips does, which is go straight out, because the Japanese are raiding. They have to go engage, because that's what the Royal Navy does. That's what the Royal Navy's there for. They cannot let the invasion go uncontested. So when you have them there, you have this small force which can't really do anything, but which has to respond, because otherwise they might as well not be there. Whereas if you keep them back in the Indian Ocean and you send cruisers forward, the cruisers have a reason not to go. You can tell the cruisers to go surface raiding, go causing trouble. And then the battleships can respond with a full force coming from the Indian Ocean, and that's a different scenario. But it's one of Churchill's less good decisions. But Churchill's obsessed with the power of these big ships. He sees them as powerful in their own right, whereas I see them as powerful in terms of their context. Yes, the Jeff Bueller, the D-class do spend a lot of time in the Med as well during the wars. The D-class are good ships to have in your reaction fleet, and that's what the Mediterranean is. Remember, the Mediterranean is the Royal Navy's reaction fleet. They have that force base in the Mediterranean because it's nice and close to the UK for lots of infrastructure to support it, but it's far enough forward based that it can rapidly be gathered together and go out to the Far East if it needs to. So do you always have a sort of two-phase likely response to any issues in the Far East. First, the Mediterranean fleet goes out and reinforces the China station, which will also, well, actually there's a three-phase. So, first of all, you'd have the Indian Ocean, the Australian and New Zealand divisions, and all the ships from their point gather into the China station under their command of that admiral. He would be the theatre commander. That's the first phase. They then defend their area and start surface raiding. Then you have the Mediterranean fleet come through, reinforce. That's now you've blocked off, you've secured Singapore. You've probably brought a whole load of troops in a convoy from India to Singapore at the same time. So you've reinforced Ceylon, you've reinforced Singapore, and you've now got a Mediterranean fleet. Then the home fleet arrives. And that's when you surge up. First, you're going to go probably to Shanghai, then Hong Kong, then Weihai Wei. You take your fleets because this is how you're going to move up. And once you've got Weihai Wei secured, you've got enough troops there, you've got that nice and secured. From Weihai Wei, you can branch out to Japan. So, you know, there is a plan, there is a strategy, and that's how these things are. And that's reflected in the deployment strategies, going right back to the end of the 1920s. Stafford Thompson, mixing RAM with blue to bring back Royal Navy blue scheme. Ooh, that could be quite nice. Martin Doherty, no matter what we put into the Battle of Java Sea, would the Japanese Long Lance not have dealt the same blow to the Abdad fleet? Would it not have been more practical to draw Prince of Wales and repulse to Pearl? You couldn't have withdrawn them to Pearl, and as I've said, the thing is, I've already gone into this answer quite heavily, Martin. As I said, they should have been back in Ceylon. They should have been back in the Indian Ocean. They shouldn't have been forward in there. Withdrawing to Pearl, you wouldn't withdraw to Pearl. In the nicest way, withdrawing to Pearl makes sense if you're American. If you're British, the things you will have to protect are back the other way. So you do not withdraw to Pearl Harbor if you're British. You withdraw to the Indian Ocean. And you build up from there. And you should have actually started building your forces up in the Indian Ocean, building it around there, and you should have had Prince of Wales and Repulse at the centre of that force. Because if you'd had them already there, you could have far easily sent out a reform force. And if you consider how quickly the British do start mobilising a fleet in the Indian Ocean under the command of Admiral Somerville after Japan starts the war, you could have quickly reinforced Repulse and Prince of Wales. Excuse me again, someone's calling. And you could imagine the siege of Singapore and those sort of things going very differently if you've got the Japanese at the end of their supply lines again, and suddenly 3 or 4 battleships, maybe more if you consider if the R-class are deployed there as well. So if you've got 3 or 4 of them, and you've got Prince of Wales, Warsprite, and Repulse, so you've got maybe 6 battleships hove into view, 6, well, capital ships, 5 battleships and a battlecruiser, hove into view, firing their guns in crescendo. That is going to flatten any attacking force on attacking Singapore. Then you've got troops reinforcing, you've got a command structure. Singapore, if Singapore is retained under those circumstances, the Japanese don't manage to take it, then the Japanese either have to start planning to launch a massive strike on Singapore, which the Royal Navy knows coming, so the Royal Navy will be sending submarines out there as rapidly as they could to form a protection line around Singapore, which is all nicely designed for it, and has got plenty of choke points for submarines to get into range. And then you have a whole sorts of different operations going on, because with a strong base in Singapore and a strong base in Australia, then it becomes far more difficult for the Japanese to operate in the Philippines, and the US Navy can advance more, the Royal Navy advance more, and it becomes a very different 1942. Right now. Jeff Beeler, what is the role of these and Med between the war? They're basically their present ships. They are, again, present ships. Daniel W. But a Dutch doctrine until 1930s was submarine-centric. Yes, they're defensive. The Dutch Navy is about defensive operations. And that's sensible. Tony Penfold, did you see the letter for Britannia 2.0 hospital ship? Yeah. You know, these things would be nice, but it's whether you can get the money for them and whether you can get the... It's one thing buying it for the money, it's keeping it funded, and it's keeping the people's support for it. And that's the thing. It would have been far easier to replace than it is to regenerate, because making the case to regenerate versus making the case to replace it is a very different case to make. I would like to see it because I think Britain could benefit from a mobile embassy. It's like I support the Prime Minister's aircraft being painted in national colours, in a national colour scheme. Because A, the RAF already has a strong tradition of individual colour schemes on aircraft. B, in the nicest way, most aircraft, especially of that size, will not be engaged within visual range. They'll be engaged by missiles from long range if they're going to be taken out. So it doesn't really matter what colour you're painting them. And, you know, if she's doing her tanker job or if she's doing her transport job, it doesn't really matter what colour she's painted in, because if she's being attacked, it's going to be by missiles from well beyond visual range, so paint her what you like. And if if you are doing the presence mission, in terms of things, it has more of impact. If it turns up and it just looks grey, it looks kind of dull and drab on an aircraft. I know on a warship it can look striking, but a warship is a very different, far bigger, different object. And even on the warships, I would like them painted a different colour than they are. I think grey's a good war colour. I don't think it's a good peacetime colour. Mm-hmm. Daniel W. World War II. I know. I have my own degree in military history, and I'm Dutch. I'm not. As I said, I'm not arguing against the idea of the Dutch having a very submarine-centric navy. I just don't think, because of the level of communications you're talking about, that their cruisers were really designed. There's often a theory put forward for them, but I think those cruisers are quite powerful units in themselves, but I don't see them as being a forward command control ship for their submarine fleets. I think their submarines were more likely going to be operating under sort of defensive Wolfpack doctrine of one of them going, we spotted targets, and the others coming in around them. Maybe she'd have been acting as the command ship in that role, but I think more likely she'd have been with any allied force, sort of allied cruiser group, much as Abda was. Don't know. which is basically what you say yourself in there. The whole point of was to lure a Japanese invasion convoy into a submarine trap and then torpedo them all. That was basically also the Royal Navy's plan for how to defend Singapore. The surface fleet would not be a primary force until Versa wanted to reverse that. People have different plans. Hi, Night Home Production. Hello. Mind Dorothy. Was part of the problem with Force Z, not Admiral Phillips, as I've heard, that he didn't believe that air attack would cause much of a problem. The other was that he was a yes man. Phillips wasn't so much of a yes man, but he did have quite a few arguments with Henderson, and they raised around the capability of aircraft in that Henderson was a very balanced approach in that he felt carriers and battleships were about the same. Phillips still believed that you could build a battleship that could survive an air attack. Could be able to survive an air attack. And Henderson's perspective was, yes, you could build a battleship that could survive an air attack like you can build a ship that can survive being shelled and all these things. But there's a limit at which they can survive. One, can they survive 2, 3, 4? The whole point is you have the aircraft carrier to break up the attack, so you lessen each individual attack. Even if it's not shooting down the aircraft, it's breaking up the attacks coming in, especially with radar-based fighter control or even airborne fighter control as they were planning in the 1930s and was working on. And with these things, you lessen the attack capabilities and therefore you have more of a chance of surviving those attacks. Nighthand Production. If the gods were kind, you could send a small fleet, a couple of carriers and a good squadron of cruisers and destroyers to the Indian Ocean, Singapore, and Lake 41. What effect would it be? Ooh. Look, if in 1941, in a nice way, that's pretty much what they do when they're organising. Look, it would have been far easier if there hadn't been the carrier stockpile, if the carriers had been kept building and they hadn't stopped the carrier building in 1939, 1940 for that year. There would have been, as I said, 3 to 4 more carriers probably available by 1941. So you could have had a couple of carriers, or maybe even 3 carriers sitting in the ocean. But I would have had my carriers, I would have had my battleships sitting in the Indian Ocean. And I would have used them as a response force. And I would have turned up at Singapore with the full response force. I'd have waited for the Japanese to attack if they're going to attack. I'd have had cruisers and submarines forward based at Singapore, but I've had the rest of the force back in the Indian Ocean. And the reason is that stops the Japanese being able to take them out. Because if the Japanese want to get to them, they then either have to go all the way around Australia and come up from the south to keep away from it, which is a logistical nightmare, and they're probably going to get spotted anyway. Or they have to fight their way through Singapore, where there's all sorts of shore batteries and things, and there's going to be submarines and cruisers to do nasty things to them, and land-based aircraft. Or they have to take Singapore and then get through. And if they're taking Singapore, doing an assault through Malaya, well, by the time they reach Singapore, my reaction fleet has turned up with a convoy of troops from India, and suddenly, yes, I might have a mighty force, but there are 6 to 7 capital ships, mostly with 15-inch guns, one with 14-inch, just to be annoying, blasting the living daylights out of me. And a couple of carriers, if not 2 or 3 carriers. That's the big force that then pushes them back. And then once they've got Singapore to operate from. They're quite a major force sitting in Singapore. You would probably have the Americans, especially if they'd had what had happened in terms of Pearl Harbor happen. You might well have, at this point, whatever American carriers, depending on whether Midway goes ahead or doesn't go ahead, link up with the Royal Navy task force, because the Royal Navy would have the serviceable battleships and carriers. The US Navy would have their carriers. So in a sort of early run of USS Robin and these sort of things, you would have the forces combine. Probably what the British would do is do something interesting, like have Nimitz as the strategic theatre commander, or Phillips. Sort of Southeast Asia would be sort of Phillips and strategic commander with Nimitz, and it'd be a joint task force with probably, especially if the Royal Navy are supplying the most of the force at this point, which they would be, you probably have a Royal Navy admiral in charge of that force. Probably Somerville, actually, interesting enough. And then you have a combined force of 6 carriers and all these battleships racing to deal with the Japanese. And you then have some very interesting battles. Probably would have a massive battle in about 1942 in the South China Sea. And that could be interesting if you have 3 British carriers and 3 American carriers versus 5 or 6 Japanese carriers. You've got the big punch of the Americans, but you've also got the constant generation of the Royal Navy ones. So the Royal Navy's ones might take over the defence, and they might form up pairs where they have a American carrier and a Royal Navy carrier sort of paired up, with the Royal Navy carrier coordinating the air defence side and the US carrier providing the strike side, and basically going, yeah, we've got a sword and a shield in each task group, and you're going to get smashed. Because you attack us, we're going to have the fighters to block you. And we find your position, we're going to smash you. Be a sort of interesting scenario. It's a lovely what-if history to go along. Rum wasn't banned till the rum ration was never banned and wasn't stopped till hasn't been stopped till recently, and they still do allow the alcohol. So nice way. I'm going to keep my sort of South China. I'm probably going to keep my drinks, although in my case it would be Iron Brew or Lilt, or possibly Coke. Tom's right though. Wasn't part of the problem with Prince of Wales repulsed was their deployment was due to Church's promise to defend Australia and New Zealand, which couldn't be done from the Indian Ocean? No, that could be done from the Indian Ocean, because in the nicest way, you cannot charge down and try and attack Australia and New Zealand if you've got a Royal Navy battleship sitting in the Indian Ocean, because they're going to come straight into your rear. Nicest way, no. It's Churchill basically insisting on forward basing, which is terrible in this circumstance. Forward basing is great in terms of peacetime presence, but it's very weak in terms of providing units around the world for them to be struck. So, for example, the units I worry most about in the beginning of any major conflict are the units which Britain has forward based around the world, which is why I would like those ships to be as survivable as possible in terms of defensive weaponry. Hence my design having 2 double 4.5 inches and 3 40mm and 2 single 30mm with martlets. Turning 343, I demand a Picard singing Heart of Oak during his interludes. We all demand a Picard singing Heart of Oak during his interludes. Basically, what happens is usually I get called out because there's tea or something being done, and they are asking me whether I want things sorted out. And my mum and sister both don't want to appear on YouTube at the moment, so they insist I walk to the end of the landing and have the conversation with them far away from the camera. Although my mum does occasionally shout out hello to you all. She hasn't this evening because she's downstairs. HMS King George V. Seriously, I'm not trying to spam. I did not get time to ask on last live stream. HMS Hood with modernization versus Bismarck at Denmark Strait. Well, as part of the modernization, they were looking at strengthening the protection around some of her new AA magazines which have been installed. So I think she does a lot better. She certainly would have better fire control, which would allow her to longer range impact, and she might well have had better seakeeping and could well have been generating more speed, especially if she'd had the full renown level refit. She would have been a much more powerful ship, so would have been far more capable and would have been interesting. Plus, remember, if she had survived that battle, then you have another cattle ship available. So you might well have had Prince of Wales and Prince of Wales, Hood and Repulse as part of Force Z. Myself, as again, if I'd had my way, they would have been in the ocean. So then you could have had, with the 4Rs and Warspite, you would have had 8 capital ships sitting in the ocean, if you'd had 2 or 3 carriers with them as well, then that becomes a very significant force in the Indian Ocean. So yes, they're not forward based at Singapore, but Australia and New Zealand would then feel defended, and the Japanese could not afford to ignore such a force sitting in there. And if that turns up in Java Sea scenario, the Japanese would probably respectfully request a decline. Martin Doherty, great points about Four Seed in Doc Singapore strategy. Died after the governor and chief of staff of Malaya refused to build defence in Malaya, like General Nori wanted to do in the late 30s or early 40s. It does certainly make us sort of a lot of issues. And that's the biggest issue, is not having a coherent plan for the defence of Singapore. In terms of what you really needed was a road which ran around the whole of Singapore, which could allow you to move forces to resist an operation, have some landward-facing batteries, and be able to do a slash and burn over much of the land leading to Singapore to allow the artillery to clearly pick out the enemies. But that's me being particularly brutal, I'm told. I've got another 20 minutes before I go and sort out my tea and get ready for my watching Mysteries of the Deep, so I'll get through these questions. But I am actually pretty much almost there. I'm doing quite good today of keeping pace. Steam White, Hedgehog, on Java, no oil and Japanese out of the war. Concentrate troops on planes, abandon else. Yeah, that to an extent, if you lose, if the Japanese do not get Java oil, there's an issue for them. Night Reflection, if you've got heavy bombers into Singapore, and providing they haven't been blown up, what effect could taking out Japanese airfields in Indochina have on the Battle of Malaysia, provided it were possible? Battle of Midway and all those things. Ooh. That could have had a big impact. That would certainly cause some trouble. Tony Fernfold, Prince Tanya 2.0, I agree. Post-lockdown, maybe some relatively cheap super yachts sent around, or small liners. That is the thing. There are going to be some small liners around, and these sort of things, which could be taken in hand. Ideally, you do want a new build ship, but, you know, relatively speaking, you could take up something quite cheap. And it would be nice to have that mobile embassy capability is quite useful. Plus, you could sell it as a job creation scheme if you pick a UK yard. Martin Doherty, RAF should revert back to blue, white, and red transport command colours, and RN should go back to blue and white for the aircraft. Tempting. Jeff Beeler, what did the 3D class in the A-70s in 1942 end up doing? Well, I actually have that in my earlier one, but in part 2... Durban, Danny and Dauntless were a key part of the British Malaysian force in 1940, watching for German merchant ships in the Dutch East Indies and doing all sorts of things. And along with Dragon, Durban escorts the Queen Mary, carrying the 2nd Australian Imperial Force to Singapore in 1941. And various other things. They are providing scouting, presence, support, all sorts of convoy escorts. They are pretty much your critical ships in terms of keeping your economy going as much as you can. You know, in a nice way, again, Battle of Malaya, Battle of Burma would have been very, very different if you kept control of Singapore. If the British could have kept control of Singapore, which they could have done if they kept those ships back in the Indian Ocean, because they could have then surged them forward and they would have reinforced Singapore, and then Singapore wouldn't have fallen, rather than them being sunk at the initial phase where they were going out trying to blindly look for the enemy. Then you have a very different war in the East from British perspective. India is that much more secure because for the Japanese, if you've got Singapore with bombers there and you've got sort of basically the British can do a sort of pincer movement of troops coming out from Singapore and troops coming from India, and so the Japanese have to defend on 2 fronts. And the Japanese fought well against the Russians up in the north of China and in the sort of Siberian or almost regions. But 2 fronts against a mechanized force is not their idea of fun. especially if you've got someone like, where is he? Yes. If you get someone like, and I know he's not always particularly popular, Slim, Mr. William Slim, or Field Marshal Lord William Slim, in charge, then they would have had a really, really nasty time. I do love. There you go. There's the picture of him. But also, I love the dedication he has in there. It's a nice, simple one. To Aileen, a soldier's wife who followed the drum, and from mud-walled hut or government house made a home. In nicest way, if Slim had been sent to command in Singapore, we'd have probably had a different scenario as well, because Slim wasn't the type to A, have a huge following of staff officers go with him, or B, treat people with kid gloves. Were any other class of cruisers built or considered after the D class, Richard Hughes? The E class, then there's the Hawkins class, they have them, they come along. The E class are particularly cool. I'll do them again. As I said, I'll probably do them in August. Need more cable subs in Indian Ocean earlier. Yes, you do, but there again, if you'd had the ability to take Singapore, keep Singapore, you could have probably surged them out there. And you'd have reason to have them out there, and you'd have the facilities to support them. And things would have been in range of them. Especially T-Class. Ooh. T-Class were basically designed with the idea of ambushing fleets trying to get to Singapore. In the nicest way, if you have a forward salvo of 10 torpedoes coming towards you, and you're in one of those very, very nice restricted channels and choke points heading towards Singapore, your day is going to be ruined. Have 3 or 4 of them, and your day is definitely ruined. Fight the Japanese the way they plan to fight Americans. Keep battle fleet back, pick off their ships with subs, aircraft, and destroyers around Malaya, then crush them with a battle fleet. Yep. Turning 343. Also, 84 watching, only 18 likes. Come on, people. Yeah. That'd be very nice. Yes. Likes, subscriptions, these are all things that are very, very good. Super chats are lovely. All people watching are just very happy to see you, basically. Furikin, given modern weaponry and systems focus, could a reversion to Nelsonian line tactics create a tactical shock? Ooh, it could be interesting. It could be interesting. Stanford Twims, how about twin close-in weapon systems? 40mm in Goalkeeper, Sea Darts, Box Launcher. The trouble is you have too many systems. You can actually then, you're not carrying enough ammunition for them, and you have a lot of complexity in maintaining. This is why it's better to simplify and go for 3 40mm, because then you have cover, especially if you have 1 on the stern and 2 manned sideways, because that means you have the stern one can cover a portion of each side. These ones, the sponsor-mounted ones, can cover something to the front. Both carry a section of the front, and both can carry a section of the stern. So if you have one go down, you can still cover things. And there's overlapping cover. And so you don't have to turn the ship much to bring a close-in weapon system to bear. Especially if you then add on at the back, maybe 2 30mm, a single 30mm each side, or a double 30mm each side with the Martler missiles. And that spins round, and so you have more cover facing rearwards and also forwards, and you have then complaining cover. You have the double 4.5s on the front, and you have spread out 2 sets of surface sea air defense VLS, and you have a strategic length missiles VLS in the center of the ship. You have nice cover around, and maybe have some torpedo launchers as well, because I'm old school. I like to have my own torpedoes just in case they get past the helicopter and I need to do a snapshot of a submarine which I suddenly detect. Jerison, what's tonight's delicious mini meal? Probably chicken or something, I think, from the smells. Night Heron Productions. Given that Hood's turning circle was and how adept the Japanese were attacking moving ships from aircraft, wouldn't it make more sense to add another KGV around? You might well have done, but honestly, they were also committed. basically what would have gone would be what would have been available. Turning 3-4-3-4, Heart of Okara ships, Jolly Tarzan men. Albert Zasky, future video idea. If I may, WV class destroyers, World War I service, interwar refits. I'm going to be doing pre-tribal class destroyers in next month's pre-tribal class destroyers, pre-tribal. I might well do the VW ones in August. It's going to depend on what people are suggesting. There are lots of place for suggestions. As I said, 2 are chosen from the suggestions on the Discord server. 2 are chosen from suggestions done in YouTube and Twitter. 2 are chosen by patrons who put forward a number of ideas. Then I select the top 4 or 5 that I think I can do in the time period that I have available to do them, and then the patrons get to vote as to which 2 of those I do. And then 2 to 3 are selected by me myself from my own ideas of what I fancy doing. As I said, I have already selected for August that the E-class cruisers are going to be done, because I've already done the C's and the D's. Makes sense to do D's. Sean Brennan, could the Japanese not have used subs to defend against capital ships' reinforcement of Singapore from the ocean? They could have in theory, but in the nicest way, those reinforcements would have come with destroyer escorts. And how many subs the Japanese could have got there with Royal Navy subs and ships still holding Singapore? And of course, if you have cruisers there, you probably still have sloops there. Oh, thank you, Mitchell. I'm glad you enjoy the streams. These things would make things more difficult, basically. There's only so much you can do if you're Japan and you've got Singapore. Singapore is not a good area for submarines to get past. So for the ships to come in, they could come in quite quickly. Then, okay, getting out from there would then be difficult once they're there. Getting out, because the things do work the same way. But again, the Japanese bases versus the British bases, where they are, the infrastructure to support these things and overlap, that's the problem for them. Steam White. Hood had serious problems with very wet stern due to extra protection and extra weaponry, lowering her design freeboard. Her speed down too. Yes, but if she'd had the engine refit, she would have probably had gained about 20,000 to 30,000 horsepower, which would have sped her up, and the engines would have weighed about half as much. So they could have actually made her faster, technically less dense and more buoyant. This is the thing. New machinery not only weighs less, but takes up less space. So you have more air inside the design, which makes the ship more buoyant as a whole. So all these things could have had an impact on their terms of her wet stern and operations. It's a very good question from KGV, actually. Bidgeron, I read that General Slim had a good relationship with his colonial troops, that many visited him after the war at home. He did have a fairly good relationship with them. He was a very, very plain-spoken man. He's definitely a product of his time, and there are all sorts of bad things about him. But he's also a very good commander, and he's a character, and he's good at what he does. So he earns respect for that. Not necessarily I agree with him on everything, but he's worthwhile looking into. He should be studied more. Martin Doherty, Percival was the wrong man for the job, plus the Malaya government was under pressure to keep tin and rubber going to drive up dollars. Only unit in Malaya command capable of jungle fighting was the Argylls. Yep, they're the only ones who practiced it as well. Jamie, Field Marshal Slim was probably the best physical commander the British Army had in World War II. I would agree with that. I definitely rank him higher than Monty. Tony Penfield, again, fantastic stream. Thank you for all the hard work. Hope your mum feels better soon. Stay safe. See you next time. Take care, Tony. Jane Richardson, Furrican, sorry to... Slim, probably most Furrykin and Slim, probably the most underrated British commander of all time. And Jerriton Furrykin, sorry, that has to be Harold Alexander or William Gott. You see, I would agree Slim is very underrated, but I would say Harold Alexander is even more underrated because at least Slim gets some portion of memory and does get to be Field Marshal and does get some sort of respect. Although he is so there are so many commanders. Basically, Monty does a very good job of sapping up. He's kind of like Eisenhower and the other one who I don't want to repeat the name of. Thank you, Furrykin. MacArthur. You see, the Americans have their own one who's constantly misunderstood, and that's Marshall. Marshall is constantly underappreciated, and he's a great general, 5-star general. It's just MacArthur gives them all a bad name. The trouble is, you do have some generals who are very, very good at the PR game. Montgomery, MacArthur, Eisenhower, to a lesser extent. Eisenhower probably does the best because he ends up becoming president. But, you know. Dutchman. The Dutch Navy never had a chance to win any battles not supported by Allied forces in mass with at least 1 or 2 aircraft carriers. That's the trouble. And that's the thing. That's why I think they sort of... You know, that's the thing. The Dutch Navy, I think, are building to an extent to be sort of built on. Steph Thompson, thank you, Doctor. I was trying to stick to keep it simple, stupid, I think. Thought it was a little busy, though. Minority. So, due to British refusing to build defensive Malaya jungle, train their troops, and have put a weak man in charge, the Singapore strategy was bound to fail. Pretty much, yes. Singapore strategy is a catalogue of errors, and which is compounded by the placement of the battleships. Because if the battleships have been put in the ocean, as I said, then they're a reaction force to Singapore getting into trouble, rather than a reaction force to the invasion of Malaya. And the invasion of Malaya, they can't do anything about. But if they'd been a reaction force to Singapore, them turning up would have flattened the force. Because by the time that force reaches Singapore, it doesn't have much in the way of air support. It doesn't have much in the way of artillery. It doesn't have much in the way of supplies. So any battleships turning up, let alone the 8 or so which could have been massed if Hood had been survived, and if, you know, well, even if Hood had survived, if 7 or so that could have been massed, the capital ships, would have been a tremendous issue for them. Martin Doherty, also tanks would need to be deployed by the British. They did actually have some tanks out there. Not as many as they could have done, but they did have some tanks out there. And this is the thing. Again, if you concentrated in India, you could have concentrated some armor in India. Probably it would have been that. What tanks would have been? Valentine tanks, more likely. Maybe Matildas. But again, those turning up in Singapore would have been a major thing. Ugh. Take care, King George V. Patton or Bradley? Jerison? No. Neither of them are good at press. Patton is actually quite good, but Patton is also quite bad sometimes at press. Arthur Rudnick, rum and iron brew, yay or nay? I've never had it, but I've heard friends who have, and they even said it's good. I don't drink alcohol, so yeah. I had a dad who was, for all his good qualities, wasn't very good when he had alcohol, so I've never touched it. And he was a lot better when he got older and started drinking less of it, and also when I was bigger. Furikin, General Marshall is one of the most underrated creators of modern life. Yeah, General Marshall is amazing in so many things. Allneck and Wavell also underestimated. O'Connor would have been amazing if he'd not been captured during Operation Crusader. Yeah. That's the other thing. The British do lose some very good officers to capturing. King George V, I never ignore your songs. I enjoy them. I just ask that you be respectful of the other people in the chat so that they can get their chats through. And also, my singing voice is terrible. When I do sing things, it's mainly meant in a slightly sarcastic, slightly cynical manner, because I am a flat bass. That is my literal singing tone, flat bass. When I sing, it's all about the bass, it's all about the bass. Literally, that is my voice. Bye, KGB again. You keep coming back. It's nice that you have come back, but you know. Veteran, MacArthur was at his best when he was the new shogun operating occupied Japan. Worst one leading troops in 1952. I would say he's worse in Korea. Nicasia, what do you think about Jellicoe's idea of Sydney as the main for Far East base with Singapore as a small forward base? He said Singapore was too close to Japan and would struggle for defence. He's got a good idea, but the trouble is Singapore's even too far away for Japan to actually do a proper defence. And you couldn't really base it on Sydney because that would be making Australia a main line of defence, and that means they could slip round to the Indian Ocean. Actually, if I was going to be doing it, if I had been doing it, I would have had Singapore as my defended forward base, Ceylon and Sydney as my two principal depot bases, so they could funnel troops and ships to Singapore, which could then shoot them up, as I said, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Weihai Wei. And that's time to go. Right, it is now past, so I will take last questions, and then I am off to have my tea and watch myself on Mysteries of the Deep. Thank you very much to everyone who has subscribed. Thank you to everyone who's been watching this evening. Thank you to all the super chats. Thank you to everyone who's a patron. Thank you to everyone who's on the Discord, and thank you to everyone who just watches and listens. Thank you. So, last questions, please. Because I said I need to go get my tea. I'm hungry. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jay Richardson. Take care, Martin. Furry Kitten, I'm wondering if you're talking about from experience of the rum and iron brew. Pleasure, Daniel. Pleasure. Jerison. O'Connor returned from normal. Yes, he did. Grace Staharsky, thanks for your evening. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thanks, Tom Bill. Pleasure. Hope you enjoyed the introduction ones. As I said, I'm going to be working on the introduction ones for next Tuesdays, which is, let's see, some of the classes which are going to be in next Tuesdays. Of course, Sunday we have another brew ships. But for next Tuesday, I've already got the Lock and Bay class in there, River class, Flower class, Castle class, Black Swan class, and all sorts of ships there, and Hunt class. There are going to be 8 classes I'm going to use as examples, not including modified ones. So basically modifieds and unmodifieds count as one class in this sort of scenario. So that's going to be a fun time. Paul Johnson, how good were the Japanese at ASW? Not as good as they'd hoped to be. In fact, by World War II, they've really fallen out of track. And in World War I, they're one of the best in the world at anti-submarine warfare. By World War II, they're really not as good as they have been. They've really let it drop. Right. Take care. Thank you. Hi, Carl. Take care. And Night Hound Production. The Japanese invasion fleet from Malaya. What would you rather tackle it? RN Subsquadron Wolfpack or an RN Aircraft Carrier Strike Force? Possibly S-Carriers. Subsquadron Wolfpack, if I had my choice. C-Class Wolfpack would be really, really good for that one. If I had the escort carriers, I would use it and I would do a night strike and I would take them out that way. But if I had no choice, yeah. Take care and thank you very much. And I think there's going to be about 4 introduction videos for next Tuesdays at the moment. So that's why I'm sort of preparing it now and recording it hopefully over the weekend so they can all be structured to come up. Anyway, take care and have a nice evening. Thank you. Thank you. And it goes.